Analysis of the conflict with the Houthis. We're joined now by Major John Spencer from the Modern War Institute at West Point and CNN military analyst Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. Welcome, both of you. General Hertling, let me start with you because as we have reported, U.S. intelligence suggests that Iran is concerned about what a response may look like. In addition to that, there is some intelligence suggesting that Iran did not anticipate the strike over the weekend that killed 3 U.S. service members. That having been said, just on Tuesday, the Houthis launched a cruise missile that was shot down just as it came within 1 mile of a U.S. destroyer. Typically, they're shot down at about an 8-mile range. So the brazenness of some of these axes and proxies of Iran continues to grow. What do you think a proper U.S. response should look like?
Well, I'm not going to go into that, Bianna, to be honest with you, because there are all kinds of scenarios that might have different contingencies and different courses of actions. Having been involved in sessions in the past when key leaders are trying to determine exactly what they should do, there are things that we don't know right now in terms of the political action. But the first thing I'd like to say is, to comment on Congressman Crenshaw's comments a minute ago. What's been interesting over the last couple of decades in the United States, the military element of power has been the first one relied upon by the politicians. And I think what the current administration is doing is attempting to ensure we don't get into another war by using the other elements of national power, which are diplomacy, information, and the use of the economy. I think we're tracking very closely what Iran is thinking. What their intelligence or what we're gathering from intelligence in the area. They have had conversations with Iraq. They've had those kind of conversations in the past. They also know that many of their popular military forces, the PMFs, are somewhat free-floating electrons. They do what they want to do with the support of Iran. But those elements sometimes get Iran into a lot of trouble in terms of diplomacy. So I think the Biden administration is attempting to measure the right kind of strike against the various PMFs and the Houthi rebels and the other factors that are trying to attack U.S. soldiers in the region. And they're considering how you balance the very fine edge between making sure people are deterred, organizations are deterred from attacking the United States versus starting a World War III, as Congressman Crenshaw sort of poo-pooed. He is not a national security intellect, in my view, and for him to say something like that just shows how little he knows about the diplomatic arm of national power.
And it's worth noting that a U.S. response likely, it appears, will not just be a one and done, that it could come in a laddered phase. It could occur over a span of weeks. Major Spencer, the secretary was also asked about the ongoing war in Gaza and said that from his perception and from what he has spoken with his counterpart in Israel about, Israel is complying with what it said would be a less intense fight in Gaza, more tailored and narrow in scope. The IDF is confirming that its operations do continue in Khan Yunis. What is your assessment of the situation right now? And do you see, and from what you do see, is Israel actually narrowing in scope its fighting there?
Absolutely. I think that they have narrowed their scope to a more refined geographic area. Even in Khan Yunis, they've handed out their maps, which is historic. In many areas that have been cleared of major Hamas military capability, like northern Gaza, can transition into other phases of the operation. So 100%, but the operation continues to clear that Hamas military capabilities and to bring Israel's hostages, to include babies, home.
Yeah, and we do know that the Hamas fighters do appear to be regrouping in northern Gaza, just as Israel had been pulling out as well, giving just a sense of how fraught this situation in this battle continues to be. General, I want you to talk to our viewers about something you touched on last night with Caitlin Collins, and that is your take on the IDF raid of a hospital in the West Bank. We had IDF troops coming in under the guise of patients and staff, doctors, nurses, what have you, and killed 3 members of Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Both terror groups have claimed that they do work for them or were part of their group. That having been said, you see problems on both sides here. Explain why.
Yeah, I do, Bianna. First of all, when you're talking about the laws of land warfare or the application of various principles of or protocols of the Geneva Convention, there are certain things that you don't do. First of all, you don't use public facilities like a hospital or a church or a school as your basis of operation. That is what Hamas is doing specifically as part of their strategy to pull Israeli forces into those locations. But the other thing you don't do, and this gets to the Israeli actions, you don't use disguises or the appearance of being a doctor or a rabbi or an imam or any kind of religious figure when you're carrying weapons. That's not allowed on the battlefield. It violates the laws of land warfare and the Geneva Convention protocols. So what you're seeing in this particular case is Israeli soldiers using disguises to go into a prohibited facility. So both sides are at fault in this particular, and at fault in violating the laws of armed warfare. But one thing that you always have to come back to, and that's the right of self-defense. What Israel is doing, even though they're doing it improperly, in my view, is saying, hey, there's the potential for future terrorist attacks to be launched from this hospital inside of the West Bank. So we want to prevent it. The way they did it is questionable, but again, the lawyers will have to determine what's right and what's wrong. The problem is when you're dealing with terrorist groups like Hamas, like the IJU, the Islamic Jihad Union, and other organizations like those, sometimes you have to beat them at their own game. And I think that's what Israel was trying to do, right or wrong.
Yeah, ultimately these cases are adjudicated by the International Criminal Court, a body that Israel is not a signatory of, nor is the United States. This differs from the International Court of Justice. Obviously, that court had been... Yes, go ahead.
And neither is Hamas, is Hamas or the Islamic Jihad Union either.
Yeah. Major Spencer and General Hertling, so much more to talk about. We'll discuss Ukraine after we come back from the break. Thank you. And trying to settle there from Victoria Newland, Fred Pleitgen joins us now from Kyiv with the details. What are these surprises she's referring to, Fred?
Well, one of the surprises might have happened overnight, Bianna, with the Ukrainians apparently conducting a raid on a Russian warship using unmanned seaborne drones. There was some dramatic video that came out of these drones apparently attacking the ship, the ship trying to fire back. You could see the machine gun rounds land in the water, but the Ukrainians are saying that the ship was sunk in the end. Now, that operation was apparently conducted by Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Agency, and the head of that agency, Kirilo Budanov, he's one of those who's being talked about as a possible successor to the current commanding general, Valery Zaluzhny. Now, I was able to sit down with Kirilo Budanov and ask him what exactly the Ukrainians need in the short term to bring the fight to the Russians. Here's what he said.
We're confident that the United States will fulfill the commitments it has made to our society. We really need this aid. Shells are one of the most decisive factors in this war. It's about quantity, not so much the quality as the quantity. Next, there are assault aircraft. These are aircraft of the type that the United States has, like the A-10 Thunderbolt II, and so on. This is what can really help inflict a military defeat. The main events of the battlefield will start happening sometime in the spring or early summer. What we have now, this situation will not change much.
So essentially what Kirilo Budanov is saying there is that despite the fact that the Russians are currently pushing on Ukrainian positions in various parts of the front line, and I've seen that myself, the onslaught that the Russians are bringing because of the fact that they have more artillery shells, he believes that the Russians will be exhausted come spring, and then it will be the Ukrainians' turn to attack Bianna. One of the things that he did say is obviously they will need a lot of shells, a lot of help to do that. Certainly today's decision by the European Union to give Ukraine more military aid and give them military aid over several years is definitely something that's going to be a big help to the Ukrainians, Bianna.
No doubt about that. Fred Pleitgen, thank you. Well, let's get the military perspective on these developments. I want to bring back Major John Spencer and Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. Major Spencer, let me start with you. So still a delay in terms of funding in some $60 billion in aid from the United States held up in Congress. But we got some good news for Ukraine in the European Union, committing to over $50 billion over 4 years. Ukraine has been desperately in need for artillery ammunition. How significant is this new round of funding for the country?
I mean, it's vital to allow Ukraine to continue to defend itself. And if it doesn't come, Ukraine will continue to fight, but Putin will have basically succeeded in his calculation that the American population would wane in its support for Ukraine and for Europe in general.
General, I want to ask you about the change of guard here at Ukraine's top command on the field. Valery Zaluzhny, there had been rumors that he would be out. There had been a growing rift between him and President Zelensky despite his popularity. And among the two candidates that have been rumored to succeed him, as we heard from Fred Peace, the first is the Defense Intelligence Director, Kirilo Budanov. He's 38 years old. He has kept Russia at its heels, specifically in the Black Sea there and around Crimea. But he's known to be a risk taker and behind some of the strikes that have gone deep inside Russia that have raised some eyebrows even in Washington. So he's one option, and the other is Alexander Syrsky, who's the current commander of Ukrainian land forces. You know both of these men well in terms of their work. Who do you think would be better suited given where the country stands right now and some of the exhaustion we're seeing from Western support?
Yeah, this is a hard issue to discuss beyond. I do know General Zaluzhny. I met him very briefly when I was in Ukraine back in 2012. He was a young colonel at the time. I don't know Budanov. He's an intelligence officer, and as you and Fred both said, he's extremely young, in his early 40s. He has been in the intelligence community his entire time as a general. He's risen through the ranks from brigadier to lieutenant general over a 3-year period of time. He is very good at targeting and using intelligence to find key targets and help launch strikes against them. That does not necessarily translate into someone who's a maneuverist or someone who can operate on the battlefield. Syrsky probably, in my view, would be the much better candidate if, in fact, Zaluzhny is going to be replaced, because he is a land combat operator. He's seen the fight close up and personal. He is not a targeteer, although he does look at the way they can attack Russia. And what you're seeing now, if I can go back to that $50 billion or 50 billion euro aid package, equivalent of 54 billion US dollars, it's fascinating because what you're seeing is not only the Europeans support Ukraine over the long term, over 3 years, which is a signal to Russia, but it's going to be more than just military supplies that they're going to get. It's going to help Ukraine's economic and financial situation as well. Those are all critical things. So you see potentially a change of command after Zaluzhny's been in the fight for close to 3 years. That's probably a good idea, get some fresh ideas. But I would think that the land commander would be the first choice and allow Budanov to continue his targeting and his intelligence collection.
Yeah, perhaps fresh leadership, fresh round of funding could be a huge boost to morale for troops as well. Also an important angle there. Major Spencer and Lieutenant General Hertling, thank you so much for helping us out today on two very big stories we've been following.